So let's look at the rest of the instrument. Obviously we've got the body here, where all this stuff sits. And the body of a lot of basses is made of wood. Various types of wood, but wood is very popular still. In the 80s, manufacturers like Steinberger and Stator started using carbon fiber or graphite for the necks of the instrument and even for the bodies. This meant very stable, strong basses that were often quite light in weight, were pretty impervious to humidity and temperature changes. However, the downside of that can be that the instruments can sound a little sterile and not as woody, if you will, whereas the actual wood of the instrument, although it's an electric instrument, the wood does play a part in the tone of the instrument. Old instruments like this were either made of alder or ash. This one is actually made of alder, and it's really light, which I happen to really favor. I think light basses are easier on your neck and shoulders and back, and also I think there's something to be said for the resonance of the wood if it can vibrate freely. Then moving further up the bass, we have the neck of the instrument, very important component. And you can see this neck is actually made of maple. This is pale wood here. This one's, because it's a 40-year-old instrument, it's pretty warm. I myself like that because of the feel of the instrument. Now on the front we have what we call the fingerboard. This is a thin strip of wood that is overlaid on the neck and glued in place. And this one is actually made of Brazilian rosewood. You can see it's pretty dark. And then here we have the frets, the metal frets, which run across the fingerboard, you can see. These are often made of some sort of nickel or steel. And then the dots here are position markers along the fingerboard, just to help you know where you are, because it's a pretty long neck on a bass guitar. And you'll also notice there are side dots on the bass too. And these correspond with the front dots. Now you will see some basses that don't have any dots at all on the front, although more often than not, they will have side markers. Now, this is just a personal preference. Some of the basses I've owned have no dots on the front. If you know the neck pretty well, you'll actually find it's not a problem because you still got the side markers. But again, if you're starting out on the bass, I'd recommend, these markers do help you know where you are on the neck, so don't shy away from that. And then we move to the top of the bass neck, and there's a little strip of plastic. This is called the nut, and in the same way as the bridge holds the strings in place down here, the nut is responsible for this end of the bass to keep the strings together here. Now this can be made of bone, plastic, graphite, or brass. None is necessarily better than the other, they're just slightly different tonally. Plastic is very common nowadays. And then this is called the headstock. And you'll notice the strings attach here onto these string posts here. Notice also there's some small stuff. We're going to talk about how to string the bass properly and different types of strings in a later segment. But just to show you, notice how the strings, the winding goes to the bottom of the post and then the extra winding on the top. This allows the strings to have good pressure on the string posts, good pressure down on the nut. You'll notice this little disc here, this is called a string tree. If you're stringing your bass, make sure the strings go under the string tree. This again maintains good pressure on the nut, meaning the string has good even response and it's fastened securely here. And then these four items here we call tuning pegs or machine heads. These are responsible for tuning the instrument. As you turn these one way, the string will go sharper, or the other way flatter. And you'll notice these are actually quite large on this bass because it's an old design. You can see the tuning gears on the back here as well. On more modern basses, these have been minimalized in size, and also the tuning peg is much smaller too nowadays. The reason for that is so that the headstock doesn't feel too heavy in the hand. So you'll notice that if you buy a new bass, the tuning pegs may well look different, but they perform the same basic function. So that's a quick overview of the bass. So now you have some idea of how it's put together and what to look for in an instrument. And this was a 4-string bass. So now let's move on to looking at a 5-string bass, which in today's music scene is very popular because it can reach a much lower register than a standard 4-string bass. And the one we're going to look at has also some newer features too, which takes this bass into the 21st century.